The last day of death row. Inmate Scott Hain. Should a teen be sentenced to die? Hi everyone. What happens when a man is sentenced to die for a crime he committed as a teenager? On April 3, 2003, Scott Hain became the last juvenile offender executed in the United States, a fact that still stirs deep national debate. At just 17, he helped commit an act so brutal it stunned even seasoned investigators. But by the time he faced lethal injection, he was 32, a man shaped by years of isolation, remorse, and reflection. His final 24 hours were marked by haunting silence, emotional goodbyes, and a last-minute legal battle that came within inches of halting everything. Inside the prison, he faced his fate without a word. Outside, the world watched, questioned, and protested. Was this justice, or a line crossed too far? In this video, we take you deep inside the final day of Scott Hain's life and explore the chilling question: should someone still die for what they did at 17? Dear friends, on April 3, 2003, the world outside Oklahoma State Penitentiary stirred with quiet anticipation. But inside, time felt different, slower, heavier. Behind a locked cell door, Scott Hain lay awake, staring at the ceiling as dawn crept in. He had woken to this concrete box for nearly 15 years. But today, everything was final. No more appeals, no more delays. The Supreme Court had issued its last word. By nightfall, he would be gone. Scott Hain was 32, but the crime that defined his life occurred when he was just 17. And that detail, his age, would come to haunt debates for decades. Hain wasn't a serial killer or a hardened gangster. He was a troubled teen with a chaotic past who made one unforgivable choice, one that would lead two innocent people to a horrific death and ultimately cost him his own. In 1987, just a few months after escaping from a juvenile facility, Scott met 21-year-old Robert Lambert. Lambert had a long history of criminal behavior and quickly became a dominant figure in Scott's life. For a teen starved of attention, Lambert was more than a friend. He was a mentor, an authority, someone who seemed to offer belonging. But what began as misguided friendship soon spiraled into a fatal chain of events. On the night of October 6, 1987, Hain and Lambert spotted a couple, Michael Houghton and Laura Sanders, sitting in a parked car outside a restaurant in Tulsa. They approached with a gun, forced the couple into the trunk, and drove them to a remote location. There, in a terrifying moment of cruelty and chaos, they poured gasoline over the car and set it ablaze. Michael and Laura burned alive inside the trunk. Hain and Lambert were arrested within 3 days. The evidence was undeniable. Witnesses, physical traces, and confessions made their guilt clear. There was no ambiguity about what they had done. The only question that lingered was this: should a 17-year-old be executed for such a crime? At trial in 1988, Scott Hain was tried as an adult. He was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder and sentenced to death. 6 years later, a court ruled that the jury hadn't been told about the option of life without parole. A new sentencing hearing was ordered, but the result was the same: death. Over the years, his legal team filed every appeal possible, arguing that executing someone for a crime committed as a juvenile was cruel and unconstitutional. Advocates pointed out that many nations had outlawed such executions, and that Hain's traumatic upbringing and age should be mitigating factors. But the courts didn't budge. In February 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his final appeal. That decision set his execution in motion. In the weeks leading up to his death, guards observed a change in Hain. He grew quiet, withdrawn. He ate less. He stopped engaging in small talk. He spent long stretches staring at the floor, seemingly lost in thought. What was going through his mind? Regret? Fear? Acceptance? Likely all of them. His final 24 hours began on the morning of April 3rd. The cell was cold and dim. At 6 a.m., guards took their posts outside his door. The Supreme Court had just overturned a lower court stay of execution, removing the last legal barrier. There would be no clemency, no delay. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board had denied his request. His attorney, Stephen Presson, arrived that morning. The news was grim. There was nothing more to do. No strategy left. Presson sat with Scott and told him, plainly and gently, that this was the end of the road. It was a crushing moment. At 7:30 a.m., breakfast arrived. A simple tray with eggs, toast, and juice. Hain ate in silence. He knew it might be his last meal, though a formal last meal would come later in the day. He was then given paper and a pen to write final letters. What do you say when the clock is running out? How do you fit a life? its pain, its regrets, its apologies, into a few sheets of paper. Scott stared at the blank page for a long time. The day wore on slowly. In the early afternoon, visitors were permitted. His family arrived. His mother, father, siblings. The visit was brief, supervised, and deeply emotional. His mother pressed her hands to the glass, separating them, tears running down her cheeks. She told him she loved him, no matter what. She told him he was still her son. His father stood quietly, offering a silent acknowledgement of their shared pain. His brother tried to hold back tears as he reached out, his fingers touching the glass, in a gesture that spoke volumes. They shared old memories, stories from childhood, laughter even, and tears, lots of them. Scott could barely speak. The lump in his throat made it almost impossible. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," over and over. For a few moments, the steel walls around them seemed to melt away, and all that remained was family. Later, his spiritual advisor arrived. They prayed together. They spoke of forgiveness and peace. Scott listened intently, nodding but saying little. By late afternoon, the tone of the prison changed. At 5 p.m., Scott was served his final meal: cheeseburgers, onion rings, and ice cream. But he hardly ate. His appetite was gone. His thoughts were elsewhere. The staff moved with quiet urgency. At 6 p.m., medical personnel entered to check his vitals and attach a heart monitor under his shirt. A guard brought in clean white clothing: shirt, pants, socks, no shoes. Scott changed slowly, saying nothing. A final checklist was reviewed. Then he sat on the edge of his bed, hands in his lap, waiting. At exactly 8 p.m., guards approached his cell. One knocked gently, then unlocked the door. Scott stood without prompting. He didn't resist. His wrists were cuffed. 2 guards led him down the hallway, with 2 more following behind. The corridor was quiet, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. Other inmates sat in silence. Some whispered prayers, some cried. Scott stepped into the execution chamber. The gurney waited. The room was sterile and cold. He climbed on without help. Straps were secured across his arms, chest, and legs. No microphone, no final words. Just silence. On the other side of the glass, 17 members of the victims' families watched. Some held hands. Some cried. Some stared directly at him. At 8:31 p.m., the execution began. A series of drugs flowed into his veins. Within seconds, his chest rose once, then again, then stopped. At 8:35 p.m., Scott Hain was pronounced dead. Scott Hain's execution marked the end of a life that spiraled from childhood trauma to one of the most controversial capital cases in American history. At 17, he helped commit an act that stole 2 innocent lives in a horrifying way. But by 32, many wondered if time, reflection, and remorse had changed the man behind the crime. His silent final moments left behind more than just a legal record. They left a moral question still echoing through courtrooms and conversations across the country. For the families of Michael Holden and Laura Sanders, justice was long overdue. For others, Hain's death symbolized a justice system unwilling to distinguish between a dangerous adult and a broken child. Thank you for watching. If this story challenged your views, please like the video, subscribe for more true crime stories, and let us know in the comments, should someone be executed for a crime they committed as a teenager? Let's talk about it.